All right, welcome to Doctors Unscripted. Today we're really excited to have Larry Lazzara from the Lazzara Law Firm here with us today. So Larry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Absolutely. So most people, when it comes to attorneys, they either love them or hate them. A lot of people maybe have worse feelings towards attorneys. I have a soft spot for attorneys because three of my roommates from college all became attorneys, so yeah. I know that you actually are human, you're good people, but of attorneys that we actually work with, you're one of the good ones, and so really nice to have you here. One of the things that we do get asked a lot about is, because we deal with pain, we have a lot of people that come in car accidents, different types of injuries, and a lot of people are actually afraid to go to an attorney. They don't know if they should go to an attorney. I'd love to hear your thoughts on why is it important for people to even consider using an attorney if they've been in some type of accident or personal injury?
Sure, that's an excellent question, and thank you again for having me on. So personal injury law is a very complicated culmination of different areas of law. You've got torts, contract, insurance law, federal ERISA laws. It's very complicated. So most people are not educated on the different types of damages, rights, negotiation tactics when dealing with insurance companies. Mm-hmm. And they don't have a responsibility to explain that to people. So when people, for example, will ask their insurance adjuster, am I entitled to this? Can I get that? They don't have to give you a response, or an accurate response for that matter. And so when you have an attorney, the attorney knows the overall process. He knows all of your rights, knows what documentation that the insurance companies need in order to make sure that your patients are being fairly compensated for their injuries. So one of the big problems that's happening right now, and it's a really big issue, is insurance companies are contacting people immediately after their auto accidents and making settlement offers right there on the spot, saying, listen, we'll give you 10 chiropractic visits and $2,000 in your pocket. I'm using that as an example. If you sign this release, and we call it a day. And a lot of people are signing these agreements and taking the money. I have a really sad story that happened pretty recently where older woman contacted my office, and she's got a legitimate brain injury, $33,000 hospital bill alone.
My goodness.
Right? So this is a woman who's going to get extensive treatment. She had a spine injury, etc. And she signed a settlement release with the defendant insurance carrier for $6,000. That didn't even pay a fraction of her hospital bill. And it's simply because the adjuster convinced her that this was a fair settlement offer, sign here and you're done. We'll make your life easy. And without talking to an attorney first, people don't understand the overall process, the intentions of the insurance company. And the biggest problem is they don't know the extent of their damages. Mm-hmm. See, it is the extent, the nature, duration, and extent of your damages that determines what a case is worth. Yeah. You cannot determine case value at the early stages of a case immediately following the accident. As you know, as pain management specialists, it takes weeks for all the inflammation to set in, for diagnostic tests to be properly run, to measure range of motion, the impact of any permanent injuries that a person may have. It takes time, evaluation, rehabilitation before we can say we know what the value of this case is. And that's a huge problem. People don't know that, and so the insurance companies are taking advantage of the population when they simply don't know better. And that's where an attorney comes in. See, I do free consultation, so immediately following an accident, somebody can call our office and we can go over all of these issues with them, explain all the different issues, and make sure they don't say anything that could detrimentally or prematurely settle their case or harm their case.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that, because when people come in, I know when I was seeing patients and people would ask me and say, should I see an attorney or not? Like, I was in a car accident, I have a lot of pain, and I said, the main benefit for me, for you to have an attorney, from my opinion, is to make sure that your bills are paid for the injury that is related to the accident. I said, the last thing that I want is for you to be worried about financial issues when you need this care. And so from my perspective, one of the best reasons to actually talk to an attorney at the beginning, like if you were in a car accident, is just because, one, as you said, they're the experts. It's like being able to talk to somebody that's been through something before. They're always going to be able to give you advice because they've been through it. This is what attorneys do that are focused on this, like you are. And they're able to say, hey, like, be careful of this, watch out for that. But in the end, the result is not to like sue somebody and get a big settlement. Like, the result is you want to make sure that your care gets paid for. And if you have more extensive injuries or less extensive, you still want to make sure. You don't know at the beginning per se how bad it's going to be.
Right.
And so going through that journey, making sure that you're in the right place to where you're back to the health that you had before the accident is super important to ensure that you actually get all the care that you need. And so that's my advice when it comes to them. But as it pertains to advice for a moment, and I'm not going to ask legal advice, obviously, because that's inappropriate here.
Sure.
But one of the things we do get asked about that I think is really, really important to address is a patient, let's say they're in a car accident or they have some form of injury. In your opinion, what is the best and first things that that person should do?
After, you're talking about after they've
so
talking to the
let's
police?
say that, they talk to the
okay.
police, whether they went to the ER or not, they're done
Sure.
with that. Because after that whole rush of experience, the next thing is, what do I do now?
Absolutely.
Right?
No,
And
that's
so
an
what's your
excellent
thought on
question.
that?
Well, first, obviously, call an attorney and call your doctor. Okay, the attorney's going to explain what kind of situation that they're involved in. So there are a lot of things, especially at the early onset of a case, that we're looking at. You know, who was at fault for causing the accident? What is the extent of the damage to the vehicles? What types of injuries were sustained?
Yeah.
That information early on will help kind of alter the trajectory of a particular case. Also, it also helps determine what type of medical physicians need to get involved. So obviously, if somebody sustains a medical fracture, and they have surgery in the hospital and then they get discharged, well, they're not going to follow up with just any doctor. It's either going to be their orthopedic surgeon or whoever the surgeon's office deems as the appropriate follow-up. So our job is to make sure that they're getting the appropriate care, following doctor's instructions, and finding really good physicians who know how to take care of people. Your office, for example, Arizona Pain, has been doing it for so long. We've had so many cases together over the years. And one thing that's always impressed me was an understanding of the overall process, but also the needs of the individual person. So you guys don't treat everybody copy and paste. It's not the same thing over and over again. The key to these types of cases is identifying what are the injuries, how bad are the injuries, what type of treatment is needed to help either heal the injuries or make the person more comfortable. And that's another thing I wanted to add to your answer when you say, it's important that we want to get the medical bills paid. There's so much more that the attorney is going to be seeking compensation for from the insurance company. So for example, if somebody has a disc injury and you do injections, for example, for patients with disc injuries, well, that's a permanent injury. And that's likely an injury that's going to continue to worsen.
Yeah, it can cause chronic back pain and it can get worse over time.
Absolutely. And if there's contact on the spinal cord, surgery could be in that person's future. So there's so many variables that if you don't have an attorney that's looking at the minutia details, you could settle your case literally for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
And I've had cases where we've taken, there were offers on the table of $24,000 and converted it into a six-figure settlement simply because pain management doctor ordered MRIs. We identified significant disc injuries and were able to get the appropriate reports to make sure our client was taken care of.
Well, and I think that's really important to talk about for a moment. So one of the benefits of going to somebody that deals with these types of injuries, both from an attorney that deals with these injuries as well as doctors that deal with these types of injuries, is knowing the long-term view. If it's with a group that's really just focused on the short-term outcomes and stuff, some things can be missed, right? If you don't get an MRI, for example, and it needs an MRI, obviously you need an MRI if the case warrants it. But if you didn't look at that and you didn't see some of the damage that's there, you'd have no idea. And if you had no idea and these issues came up 10 years later, then it's not going to be tied back to that case. There's no compensation for that. And so I don't ever look at cases from our team as a way of compensation, but I do look at it from care, which is I want to make sure that you as a patient have everything you need to take care of yourself for anything that's related to this issue, or this accident, right?
Right.
And I think that's really important to have that long-term view. I think the other thing is, as an attorney who deals with this a lot and focuses on this with their team, is you've seen the negative outcomes, not just the positive.
Right.
And so you hear from your clients or patients 10 years down the road and like, hey, is this related? And it's like, well, it could be, right? And if they did take a settlement early on, you've seen both the good outcomes, the bad outcomes, and now you can take all of that wisdom. And if a person comes to you and asks those questions, you can actually guide them and say, hey, well, let's look at this, and maybe we should get another opinion on X. And I think that's really important to look at. One of the things you did say, though, is you said your first recommendations after somebody gets in a car accident. You said, talk to an attorney, talk to your doctor. I think a lot of people are confused of what type of doctor to talk to.
Sure.
So from your experience with personal injury, there's a lot of different doctors that can be involved in a case. What do you feel like is a really good place to start? And it's not the only place to start, but where do you feel like someone, they've talked to the police, they've got out of the ER, they have back pain, they have neck pain, do they go to their primary care? Like, where's the best place to really start that?
That's an excellent question, and a lot of primary care physicians aren't going to like my answer. So primary care doctors typically aren't trained for trauma cases, and auto accidents are trauma. And I've seen it time and time again on case after case after case where somebody will follow up with their primary care physician, and they're not going to build the file like your company would, for example. And what do I mean by that? Building the file entails diagnosing what the actual injury is. What is the underlying problem? So I've seen so many cases where somebody will come into their primary care physician's office, and what do? They refer to physical therapy. Say, all right, whiplash is the diagnosis. They refer it out, and the person just does thousands and thousands of dollars worth of physical therapy, but then never gets better. The problem with that is that they didn't diagnose what the underlying condition was, meaning MRIs weren't done, pain management wasn't involved, so the use of anti-inflammatories, for example, weren't being utilized, and they go right to the rehabilitation. Now, physical therapists, a lot of people don't know this, they're not qualified to diagnose injuries. They can't do it. So that has to come from the doctor. And if the primary care physician is just saying you've got whiplash or a basic muscle strain without further evaluating the case, a lot gets missed. So it's so important that they present to a company like yours where they know how to do a proper evaluation, know what examinations to order right up front, and then put on an appropriate treatment plan, a conservative treatment plan.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously one thing I've always loved about your practice is you don't rack up bills. You only provide treatment that is necessary to treat the condition that's right in front of them. So you eliminate the more conservative options first before going up the ladder for more intrusive or more invasive procedures.
Yeah.
And by doing so, you're accurately diagnosing the injuries, you're allowing time to measure the extent of those injuries, the duration of those injuries, while keeping those costs down to your patient. So I think you do a great service to them.
That's very kind. I do think that there is absolutely a great methodology in going from conservative to less conservative. And as a company and as a team of providers, that's something we try to do. But I think you also nailed the other part of it is the more important or the most important part is actually accurately diagnosing and then matching treatment to diagnostics, right?
Right.
Sometimes it's great to start with chiropractic and physical therapy. Sometimes that isn't the right first step, right? And based off of accurately diagnosing what's going on with this patient, you're going to know what's the right next step of care. You know, in our company, one of the things is we have multiple different specialties, and we believe that a big problem in pain management, but also in healthcare in general, is fragmentation. Yep. And so in essence, everybody's doing the best they can. The primary care, who has great training, but again, they're dealing with all sorts of different conditions, different sicknesses. They're doing the best they can in their box. And then you have primary care, pain management, and they're doing the best in their box. And you have physical therapy, you mentioned. They're doing the best they can with what they have. And so you have all these different providers that have great hearts, they're there for the right reason, they're trying to take care of their patients, but they're limited in the information they have based off what they have in front of them and what the patient's telling them. And unfortunately, patients tell different specialties different things. And so the picture, and again, it's from good intent, but the picture isn't always complete by any one provider. And so what we found is when you can bring all that information together, you get a full picture of what's going on. And so I wanted to ask you, because you deal with patients that maybe are seeing all of these different providers. Frequently, the providers may not talk to each other. How do you help manage that case where you have all of these well-intentioned doctors doing the best that they can for their patient, but the care is not always synergistic? So how do you deal with that out in the community?
First of all, that is an excellent question. And I didn't get to mention this earlier, but I teach chiropractors on a postdoctorate level advanced case management. So I'm the attorney that's going out there showing how to use a multidisciplinary approach to treating personal injury cases. So I encourage the use of specialists to identify their respective specialties' injuries. So for example, you have somebody you suspect has a traumatic brain injury, you're going to bring in a neurologist who's going to do a proper neurological workup and give you an accurate diagnosis. If it's an orthopedic issue, knee tear or shoulder tear, something to that effect, you're going to bring in an orthopedic surgeon who's going to do MRIs and determine whether or not physical therapy, injections, or surgery would be appropriate under the circumstances. You need an attorney who actively manages these cases. What does that mean? You can't just have a huge stack of files on your desk and get to them when you get to them. You have to read the documentation as it comes in. You have to talk to your clients. You have to find out about prior medical histories, and that's another thing that a lot of people do not do, physicians included, is they won't order prior medical records and review them before writing statements about accidents caused by the auto collisions. So what we do automatically is right out of the gate, we order the prior medical records to make sure if, say, for example, an orthopedic surgeon comes in and says, listen, we've got a shoulder tear, but there's also some degenerative issues going on. Well, we need the surgeon to tell us whether or not the tear was caused by the accident. So what do we have to do? Establish a baseline. What was this person's condition before the accident? That's where we go to the prior medical records. Most doctors don't do this. All right, and it's a step that it's very frustrating because a lot of cases that end up going to litigation, this is one of the big problems. This is where a lot of the doctors get tripped up.
This is that fragmentation of, like, if you don't have that record, you don't know, and you're trying to do your best, but you don't have it. And that would make sense that it creates problems on the legal side.
Absolutely, absolutely. So anytime, say for example, we bring in a neurosurgeon and the person needs a $250,000 fusion surgery, right? We're going to have a nice long conversation with that surgeon. Say, did you read the prior medical records? Are there any prior MRIs? Were comparative reads done? You know, what can we prove was caused by the accident?
Yeah.
Because that's a very important detail. We understand the condition as it is now is surgical, but how do we tie it? Can we tie it to the mechanism of injury, which is the auto accident? And this is the type of stuff that people who aren't lawyers in the personal injury world don't know how complicated this is and how much really goes into winning a case. You know, that everybody's used to seeing the cheesy commercials or the catchy jingles, but the attorneys who work up their files and actively manage, they're the ones who are getting really good results.
That makes sense.
Because they're working hand in hand with the doctors. And that's one thing I've really enjoyed with your office over the years is we talk about cases. We make sure both sides has what they need so that when it gets presented to the insurance company, it's a smooth process for your patients. And we're in a position to best negotiate a favorable outcome for those patients.
I do think that working with, I mean, we don't do a big amount of personal injury. I think it's like between 5 and 8% of what we do in a given year. So it's not a huge focus for us, but it is something that we believe needs to be done really, really well. And you need to help those patients because there's a lot of, it's a tricky space. You're treating it different than pain in the fact that you need to know this was from a car accident. That's different than somebody that tripped and fell. That's different than somebody that has chronic back pain for their whole life. And so you do need to be able to really know the space. But the second thing is working with attorney groups. One of the reasons I like our patients to have attorneys for this is what you just mentioned. If they say, hey, I have a brother that's an attorney, he can help us out. It's like, that's fantastic. But are they going to be able to provide the resources and the focused information on the space and the experience in the space that's going to help in the case? And so where we've seen it really beneficial to work with groups like yourself is that where you do what you just mentioned. You're mediating, I shouldn't say mediating the case because it has a different legal term, but you're really trying to connect the dots between all the different providers. So if we're doing the best we can, and we have a lot of different specialties from interventional pain to physical therapy and chiropractic, and we're doing everything we can, but we don't do neurology, we don't do neurosurgery. And so if there are things like that that are needed and they're getting care there, one of the things that we found is really good attorney groups that focus on this space can help bridge that gap of saying, hey, we have them going here, we have them going here, and where that information would have been fragmented and we wouldn't have had that whole picture, oftentimes you can fill in some of those gaps, which can lead to better care because it's more synergized with everything else that's going on. So we've really appreciated working with attorney groups like yourself because of that added benefit to care.
Absolutely, and the outcome is so much, the scale of the outcome in favor of your patients when you have an attorney involved in the case actively managing it, the results are exponentially better. And that's the thing. People, they're always, a lot of people are afraid of lawyers. You know, there's this stigma attached to us. I can understand why. You've seen the billboards with guys with sledgehammers and like jackets ripped
giant
off.
Motorcycles.
Wrestling snakes. I mean, that's not our office, all right? We believe in a more traditional approach to lawyering. And what that also entails is hard work, dedication, attention to detail. So over the years, I've been practicing law almost 20 years now, and I've handled over 2,500 personal injury cases from start to finish, right? So thousands of PI cases. So I know the inner workings of the insurance system. I understand the doctor's offices. I understand the documentation that is needed. I know the overall process, which is why I teach it to doctors. We put on these advanced case management seminars. Having a guy like me representing your patients, protecting their interests, making sure the insurance companies can't keep harassing them with lowball settlement offers, and protecting them to ensure that they get the treatment that they need and frankly deserve because somebody else wasn't paying attention when they were driving behind the wheel. We work on a contingency too, so it's not like the patients are paying us out of pocket as the case goes.
I mean, that is a fear for people of like, one of the reasons people don't go to the doctor after an injury is because they're like, it's going to be expensive.
Right.
One of the reasons they don't go to an attorney is they're like, I don't know if I can afford an attorney for this. And so, you know, what you're talking about here is that there's no financial risk in coming to talk to a group like yours because you're going to say, hey, if we represent you, any payment's going to come from the settlement, not from your pocket directly of you paying, right?
That's exactly right. That's called a contingency agreement, and that's all I do. I only do contingency. So anybody can call. We're happy to discuss their case with them, explain the overall process, and I think it's really important. And just to give you a quick story, something that just happened in the last week and a half, where I have a client who's treating with a chiropractor who called me saying I'm having some shooting pains going down my leg. He was in an auto accident, so I called the chiropractor and I said, what's the game plan here? How are we looking at this? What's your battle plan? And no MRIs were ever ordered. And I said, well, why? He's having shooting pains. He was in an auto accident. He's an older guy. What is the avert? Just help me understand your position. And it just turns out that he didn't want to rack up unnecessary expenses for the case, which is something that doctors do often. The problem is the doctors don't know the landscape of the insurance front. They don't know how much coverage is available. They're playing lawyer, okay?
And they shouldn't be doing that.
They should not be doing that, right? So want to guess what the MRI found?
Oh, I'm sure it was a disc bulge.
Several disc bulges, several. So if you don't have an attorney that's listening and collaborating with the physicians, it was about 4 disc herniations that would have been missed and undiagnosed had I not had a conversation with the chiropractor to understand the approach that the chiropractor was taking. Now the beautiful thing about working with an office like yours, and this would be an ideal case to have you guys working on, is that you can help with the inflammation, the pain, and help co-treat, co-manage along with the chiropractor so that the chiropractor can do his conservative modalities while you handle
the interventional pain.
The interventional pain, exactly.
Yeah, I think that it's really important to look at this because when we instruct our team, one of the things that we really tell our doctors is do what's right for the patient. Like one of the things we don't want to do, and you touched on this. This is not only in personal injury. This is throughout healthcare. One of the biggest mistakes I feel that people can make in healthcare is they're trying to treat based on a financial outcome rather than what's right for the patient. And this works both ways. You can have doctors that are doing it poorly by saying, I want to charge as much as possible, which is terrible. But you also have doctors that are doing the opposite, which is I want to charge them the least as possible. And that's not right either because they may need imaging, they may need labs, they may need things. And if you're trying to say, well, you know what, I'm not going to order that because I want to save the patient money. But if they truly need it and you miss that, that's terrible. And so one of the things that we say to our team is like, always do what's right for the patient. Don't think about the financial side. Think about what you would do if this was your mom, if this was your dad. Like, do what's right for the patient and you shouldn't go wrong. And so I believe that in healthcare, that's one of the best mantras that we can follow on is if you just follow good healthcare principles and do what's right for the patient, regardless of cost, you're going to land up right in the middle of where you need to be. It's not going to be more expensive than it needs to be, but it's also not going to miss care that should have happened because you're doing what's right for the patient. And that's where we need to land, and that's what we always try to do.
And that's a very admirable approach. And one of the good things about working with my office is I help keep everybody in their lanes, so to speak. And good communication with the doctors, with the patient, where we can collaborate on how much coverage is available, what can we approve, can't approve on any given case. And what I've loved about your office over the years is even when there wasn't enough money, that never stopped you from taking care of your patients. And that's very admirable. And very few companies out there follow that mantra. And I think that's something very important that your patients should know. And your staff, that you guys go above and beyond, willing to take financial hits in order to have a better patient outcome. That's very admirable, very selfless. And there needs to be more people like you guys out in the healthcare world.
Kind.
I mean that sincerely. I really do. We see a lot of the ugly side in the personal injury world. We see a lot of the ugly side on healthcare, and I'm very picky with the doctors that I work with because of that. And like you said earlier, we've worked together for over 10 years. And that's because you're a respectable company, you take care of your patients, and you communicate. We've had some very complicated cases over the years, and we've won every single one of them because of good communication, good documentation, and the three of us, my office, your office, and the patients all communicating, working together, and I take on the insurance company because everybody gives me the ammunition. I need to do it correctly.
Absolutely. Well, and it's a noble mission to be able to be fighting for the patient on the patient's behalf to make sure they get care, both from a provider side and an attorney side. I'm sure you have some interesting stories, but I'd love to ask you, really again from a patient's perspective, what is the ideal? Like when a patient follows these formats and is doing these things, this is like the dream client for you. I'd love to kind of put that out there because I think that a lot of patients just have no idea where to start, what to do, who they should go to. So if you can kind of tell us of like, we started off with, what's the first thing that a patient should do?
Right.
And then from there, what's the process from they see their provider, they start getting care to where you get to go and fight for them with the insurance company. What does the in-between look like for the ideal patient?
Sure, that's a great question. I could write a whole novel on that, but I will give you the abridged version. So first thing, as soon as a patient hires us, okay, we officially become the mouthpiece of that patient as far as it pertains to dealing with insurance companies or any outside entities that aren't their physicians, okay? So we handle all the communications with the insurance companies so they're not harassing them about settlements or updates or anything like that. That allows the patient to focus on what's important, and that's their health, and that's getting better. During this process, while they're getting diagnosed, while they're going through the evaluations, my office is doing an investigation onto liability. What does that mean in English? We're trying to find out who caused the accident. We need to know about insurance. Does the other party have auto insurance coverage that'll pay for the damages that were caused to the patient? Does our client have auto insurance coverage that could contribute to the outcome of the case? Then we have to see were there other people involved in the accident. Is it a multi-vehicle collision or not? Because that impacts how many people have their hands in the same cookie jar with the insurance policy. Then we have to look at, okay, what is this patient's medical history? All right, so if you're treating disc herniations on a 60-year-old, well, chances are there are significant degenerative conditions that are already there, which, as you know, happens over time naturally. So we want to find out what was that baseline. So we'll order prior medical records. One really cool thing, and this is new, we hired a medical professional in-house to do all records reviews, both priors and post-MBAs, to make sure we've got everything we need. And it's been phenomenal, absolutely incredible. So we're going to look at the patient's baseline, we're going to order those prior medical records, and we're also going to be in constant contact with both the patient and the physicians to see, all right, where are we going with this case? What exactly are the injuries? And if we find out that there's a significant medical history, we're going to send that medical history to the physicians because clients, as you know, don't know the entire medical file that they've had, especially if they're 60 and they've been to the doctors or the chiropractors. They have prior conditions, but they don't know how to articulate the exact conditions. So the documentation is very important so you can establish that baseline. And then you have the opportunity to say, okay, well, if we're going to order MRIs, we should probably get a copy of the old MRIs and have a neuroradiologist do a side-by-side to see what can we prove is new that was caused by the auto accident, because that is what's going to be covered under the insurance claim. And those are the types of issues I'm worrying about as the case is progressing. So most physicians who don't do a lot of personal injury work just treat and treat and treat and treat, then they hand you a bill and say, pay us. And then there are times where you say, well, everything you did every condition you treated, this person had before the accident. So how am I supposed to prove that any of this was caused by the accident? I can't, because you never ordered a comp read of the MRIs, you didn't read the priors, you didn't establish a baseline, you put me in a very bad position now. So by having an attorney who does active case management allows me to look at the medical history, collaborate with the physicians, make sure everybody's on the same page, and then move the file forward. While the patient is still treating, I'm constantly in contact with the insurance adjusters, giving them updates, testing the waters to make sure there's sufficient coverage to be able to pay for all the treatment that our client is doing. A lot of law firms out there don't do this. They just sit back and wait when a person's done treating.
Get all the medical records and then start the process.
Right. So we take, again, we're a smaller practice, so we try to stay on top of every individual file.
More hands-on.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
So let me ask this then. With a patient, they come in, they start getting care. One of the things that I've seen that is a problem for us is that patients will come in and then they don't come in as frequently sometimes. Now this is rare, but it does happen.
It does.
So what is your advice to patients of if the doctor's recommending you need to come in this often and you need to get this type of care, should they do it? Should they not do it? What's that process? Because I've seen that patients they have questions and their attorney may be telling them one thing and they get confused and they don't know what to do. What does that process look like ideally?
All right, so my advice is always do what your doctor tells you to do. Follow the doctor's orders. Yeah. Now, one thing I have to remind the doctor sometimes is life happens.
Yeah.
Patients, family members die and they have to move away, or there's a pregnancy and they can no longer do pain management injections or MRIs. Life happens. So sometimes there are very legitimate reasons why they're unable to follow a treatment plan. One of the most common situations, and I know you've seen this, is when somebody can't afford to take off from work. Okay, I'm going to tell you a quick story because it gives you some pretty good perspective. There was a woman who was in an auto accident and she worked full time. She was the sole income in the household. Her husband was dying of cancer, all right? Couldn't work, was home, very sick, had about 3 months left to live by the time I was ready to wrap up her case. Wow. Throughout the duration of the case, she worked full time, went to the doctors when she could, and had to be there at home to take care of her husband. And at the end of that case, I'll never forget this. It was about 7:30 at night, because I work nights as well. And I'm doing the final accounting, getting ready to send the numbers over to the client. And I had this moment where I thought, what if I were in that position and I only had 3 months left with my spouse? What would I want to be doing? And I decided that I was going to do something very special for this woman. So I called her and I said, listen, I want you to make me a promise. She says, well, what's that? I said, I'm going to waive all of my fees and costs in your case on the condition you use the money to make some memories with your husband before it's too late. She's crying, sobbing, why would you do that? My response was, because there's more to life than just money. Some things are more important than money. And this is a woman who tried to go to her doctors frequently, but life happened. And so that's something that we all have to be sensitive to. There are things outside of our control. There are obligations that maybe people are ashamed to talk about or just don't talk about.
That's a good perspective.
Yeah.
I think that as providers, we're so focused on trying to get the patients better that it is easy, to your point, to forget everything else that's going on in their life because we're just like, this is what you need to do to get better.
Right.
But in reality, that's not always going to happen because patients have to still continue to live their life. They have to go to work. They have to take care of their kids. They have to, life happens. I think that's such a great perspective.
There's one more point I want to add to that. Is don't forget the mental health aspect of it as well. So a lot of people, when you're in an accident, it's traumatizing. It's a traumatic event. And people get anxiety, severe anxiety, not only driving, which could impact their ability to go to the medical appointments, but also the anxiety of incurring all these medical bills, not knowing how they're going to get paid or what to do. Again, this is why you really need an attorney. And what I see, and it's a big problem, is doctors aren't identifying these psychological injuries and referring them to the appropriate mental health professionals. It's very easy to have post-traumatic stress syndrome following an auto accident. It's very easy for a child to get anxious in a vehicle or have some degree of psychological trauma. why aren't doctors referring them to the appropriate people?
Great perspective.
Exactly.
How common is it to have behavioral health included in any type of psychological work included in a case these days?
In my practice, almost every case.
So you're seeing like it's really important, that needs to be addressed. And is it happening because you're helping to direct that, or are you seeing that providers are becoming more aware of that need and starting to refer more? Which is that?
Attorneys don't direct care. So
that's a good point.
So,
but counseling and helping and directing, yeah, I get that.
Well, it's more of an inquiry. It's like, okay, because you're talking to your patients, and you, as an attorney, I have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that my client is getting the care that they need, and that I seek reimbursement from the insurance companies. But I also have to make sure the doctors are doing their jobs.
Okay.
All right. So if I get a client who's saying, I'm having significant anxiety, I'm depressed, this happened since the accident, my response is, well, did you tell your chiropractor or your pain management doctor? Well, no, they never ask. I think you should. Like, go and tell your doctor all of the things that are wrong, and see if they think it's appropriate for them to make the referral to one of these counselors. And there are very few mental health professionals that will do personal injury work, okay? So it's not hard to find one of those doctors, because there are only maybe a handful of them that are out there that I know of anyway. And it is, they're very good, by the way, at what they do. And they've had some really hardcore cases, especially out of my office. But it's extremely common for people to need to talk to somebody about the emotional aspect. I mean, how many people have been in auto accidents and had nightmares about the accident? Or
it's hard for them to drive afterwards because they're afraid. Yeah.
You know, you've heard of the white knuckle effect, where they grip the steering wheel so tight that their hands turn white from the strain. That's a psychological injury. But so many doctors are so locked into doing the rehabilitation or making them pain-free that they're not paying attention to the other issues. Another thing too is cognitive. Why are they missing the appointments? Are you asking why? Because what I've seen happen is somebody had, one lady had a traumatic brain injury, and she kept forgetting. She couldn't remember she had appointments. She was missing work. She was forgetting to set her alarm. All of these signs and symptoms were there. Is the doctor paying attention? Are you asking why? You missed your appointment last week. Why? What's going on with you? Incontinence, for example, is another one. Sometimes following an auto accident, a spine injury or a TBI, traumatic brain injury, is causing incontinence. Are the doctors asking, you know, are you having any other issues? Or what is going on? So communication is key.
Yeah, I think to your point, the two things that are really important in that is you have to have a whole body approach. Sometimes as providers, we get so focused on, tell me where it hurts, and we go, and we focus right on that spot, but you really need to look above and below. You have to look at the whole system. You have to ask those other questions, especially when someone first comes in. But continuing on with that sometimes symptoms show up later because it takes time for them to manifest fully, or people are embarrassed at first, and then they think it's going to go away, and then it doesn't go away, and then they tell us about it a month later. I think it's really important in the healthcare field, regardless of whether it's with personal injury or any other type of condition, that one, we're taking a whole body approach, because systems are connected. As much as we like to specialize urology and neurology and all the different ologies, right? Like we love to specialize, systems are connected. Neurological issues can affect bowel, bladder, it can affect pain, it can affect, you know, all sorts of different systems. Nerves control everything in the body, right? And so we do need to have that approach. And the second thing is you have to care. I think most providers are really good at that part. They care about their patients, they want to help them, they have incredible intentions. I feel like the only time it doesn't happen, it's not because they're not caring, it's because they're in a hurry. More and more we are seeing that because insurance reimbursements are going down, a lot of people have compensated by seeing more patients. And when you see more patients, you don't have as much time with your patients. So you're trying to give the best care you can, but sometimes you don't ask those other questions outside of, okay, you have back pain, well, what else is going on? And I think that when it comes to personal injury, because of the complexity of the injury, it's really important to slow down and say, has any other symptoms shown up since I saw you last? Is there any other things going on? And asking those right questions is going to increase the care. I do want to circle back for a moment on the psych issue. I do feel like having psychological or behavioral health providers as part of the treatment team in personal injury is newer in the fact that it probably wasn't that way 20 years ago.
No, definitely not.
How have you seen outcomes for patients that have been, obviously you have all these different experiences, all these legal cases you've worked with. from all that legal experience of helping patients to get better and to get their cases where they're in a better place, hopefully after care, what has been the outcomes for the patients since they've started to include behavioral health in the treatment team versus before when it wasn't part of the team?
I will say this, and this happened recently, life-saving. One of the doctors that I work with convinced one of my clients not to commit suicide.
Wow.
Okay, so that's how serious it can be, it can get. Obviously that's an extreme case, but that's the value of them. My client would probably be dead right now had he not been talking to this particular psychologist who specializes in personal injury cases and trauma cases.
Wow.
So it can be very altering. I want to give you another example, and this is important to know, is that the trauma affects people differently. Here's a great example. I had twin sisters, high school girls, that were in an auto accident. One girl, full recovery, small bills, did great, went back to school, no problem. The second one ended up flunking out of high school, attempted suicide twice, and it turns out she developed a neurological problem, which also impacted mental health because of the auto accident. And so we had to coordinate with Phoenix Children's Hospital's neurology department and neuropsychology department in order to find out what is going on with this kid. Sure enough, it was caused by the accident. But when you're going to a chiropractor who's not asking the right questions, or you're going to a primary care physician and they're not asking the right questions, or just throwing pills at them, well, they're not identifying the underlying problem. So one of the things my seminars, my conferences every year is really hammering home is education. There are different types of injuries in auto accident cases besides my neck hurts, my back hurts. There's psychological trauma, there's neurological trauma, and there are impairments, for example. So you might have a patient who you got them feeling better, and by better, stable, but they're still in daily pain, maybe 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10. Well, what does that future look like for that person? What's the next 10, 20, 30 years going to look like? And a good attorney is going to hone in on that and get reports from specialists, present that information to the insurance company, because it will affect the outcome of the case. And that's why you need doctors who are paying attention, asking the right questions, and an attorney who's actively managing that case and collaborating with the specialists.
So you've brought up chiropractic multiple times. Do you feel like chiropractic is a great modality in the treatment of pain related to car accidents and injury?
Yeah, I think chiropractors are an invaluable resource to personal injury care. I've worked with chiropractors. I'm the attorney for the Arizona Association of Chiropractic. I've been a very aggressive advocate for the chiropractic profession, because you want to talk about physicians who care. I mean, these guys have been going above and beyond. Take your own Dr. Myers, David Myers, in your practice. I've worked with him for a dozen years at least, and I've never seen a guy like him day in and day out dedicated to getting it right. He really wants to get it right. He genuinely cares, and he knows he can't do it all. So the chiropractors that understand that there's more potential injuries, more damages that are outside the scope of chiropractic, those are the guys you want to work with, because they get it, they understand. I got to refer to a neurologist because there's a potential concussion, or I have to refer to an orthopedic surgeon because of a potential shoulder tear or knee tear. So chiropractic is incredible, but they're also what are called conservative modalities. So the insurance companies don't like you going from auto accident right into surgery. They want to see you eliminate conservative modalities, and that's where chiropractic comes in. They're entry-level physicians who do an excellent job of evaluating, diagnosing, and referring out. Most of the chiropractors I work with get pain management involved right away, because they're going to be collaborating on, okay, what kind of, whether medicinal or co-management treatments are you able to offer your patients while they do the conservative modalities, any MRIs, any tests, or anything else you see that's outside the scope of chiropractic that pain management or neurology or something like that could get in and help co-manage the case with. So I've been putting on these conferences for almost 13 years now, a lot of them, and hundreds of doctors over the years have come to these. And I show them how beautiful it is when everybody talks, how everybody works together, how you identify all the different injuries using the different specialties. And that's how you get the best case outcomes. And I've done it with your own Dr. Myers time and time again. And he and I have had results that were phenomenal, and the patients were so happy because we were able to have that dialogue and bring in the right people at the right time.
I love to hear that. Yeah, there's been a really amazing trend over the last 20 years of chiropractors working closer and closer in an integrated setting with interventional pain.
Yeah.
And I believe that's been a massive benefit to patients, that as their providers work more collaboratively, you get better care because of the fragmentation we were talking about earlier. When doctors don't talk, it's really hard for patients to get better at the rate that they could.
Right.
When doctors actually are communicating, they're talking, and they're working together, you're going to see better outcomes and faster outcomes,
right,
because you're not missing information. You're not starting over every time a doctor sees a patient where they've never seen it before, they have to start from zero. Because they don't know. Even though we request records and we ask all those things, you've never seen them and you're starting there. In a group practice where you have both specialties collaborating, if the chiropractor is seeing a patient and it needs to go to interventional pain, the chiropractor can say, hey, this is what I've done, this is what I've tried, this is what I think's going on. That's such a better place for the interventional pain doctor to start, rather than, I just got a referral, this is a new patient to me, what do I do?
Right.
And so I think that trend has been incredibly helpful for our communities, and it's been really, really great for the patients in the fact that they're getting better care.
Yeah, and it's so important that you pick the right interventional pain management company, because I've seen some horror stories out there with bills astronomically off the charts, and it's just not fair to the patients. So it's really important that people out there know that companies like yours exist and that you're committed to the patient outcomes and you're selfless. You know, it's not all about the money with your office, and that's really important. And like I said, I've had so many positive experiences with your practice, but also amazing outcomes because we collaborate, we talk, and you guys refer out outside of your practice when appropriate. And that's a beautiful thing because you're putting the needs of the patient above all else. And I think that should be the priority in healthcare.
We agree, so I appreciate the kind words. So most of the people that listen to our podcast are patients and different people that are interested in learning more about healthcare, and the interaction between healthcare and legal is a really interesting one. But I know that there's also a lot of doctors that listen to our podcast. So for somebody that maybe is not working in personal injury right now,
Yes,
but they have a desire to start doing some of that, what would be your advice to them? Where should they start? What should they look for?
Honestly, come to the seminars and the conferences that we put on, because you're going to see how documentation works, how collaboration works, how all the different specialties work together to take a case from start to finish. Those conferences are invaluable. Just this past January, we had a multidisciplinary panel. I created 4 fact patterns, so 4 different patients, all with different elements in the same auto accident. And we brought in every single specialist to talk about different types of injuries, modalities that are available, management techniques. So knowing where that particular physician who wants to get involved in personal injury fits, what piece they have in the big puzzle, that's invaluable. So you gotta know your role, okay? What is your lane and what's outside your lane?
So first point of recommendation then, if somebody wants to get involved in personal injury as a provider, is get educated on the space, right? Don't just walk into it blind. There's a lot of mistakes that can be made. You can ruin a case. Nobody wants to do those things. So first thing, get educated. Start to understand the documentation, understand the team, understand your role. What's next?
Well, learn the issues. So a good way to start is read independent medical examination reports from the other side. So what is it that the other side is looking to poke holes in a case? You know, what diagnostic tests weren't done that should have been done, or what conditions are they trying to say were pre-existing versus acute, or knowing how they're going to come at you. That's how I won every single case when I was a prosecutor and a defense attorney. I would always build my case from the perspective of the other side and identify what weaknesses they were before I would present it to the other side. That's what made me such a successful personal injury attorney, is I have an opportunity to really strengthen a file, making sure all of the different needs of the file are met, causation statements, missing records, etc., before I hand it off to somebody else and say, what do you think this case is worth? Doctors need to know what's available to them, which is why you got to talk to other specialties. You have to have a good referral network, okay? So if you're a pain management doc, you need a good neuroradiologist, you need a neurologist, you need a trauma psychologist, you need an orthopedic surgeon, you need a neurosurgeon.
Not only do you need all those, you need ones that will actually take personal injury.
That's
right?
key. That's
exactly
right. That's exactly right, because these doctors need to know how to write reports, because if they don't, what's going to happen? The insurance company is going to say, well, the doctor didn't say this was related, therefore we're not covering it. And you're going to end up in litigation spending tens of thousands of dollars fighting over whether or not that condition was related or not, because the doctor didn't write one sentence at the end of his report. So doctors need to educate themselves on what is a causation statement, what's a mechanism of injury, how do the insurance companies review these files and try to poke holes in the cases. What is the best way you can support a case and a patient and contribute to the outcome? And not when I say outcome, I don't mean settlement or money. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about diagnosing, evaluating, and getting the appropriate treatment for the patient.
Yeah, because I think anybody that wants to be in this space, you do need to understand that it's different. Not only do you have to provide incredible care, but you have to be comfortable with your care being scrutinized. Right? Because that's the truth of any case that you're going to see, it may go to litigation. And if it goes to litigation, you need to make sure, not only did I deliver great care, but does my documentation show why I delivered the care that I delivered?
Sure.
And so getting the education, I think, is really important on knowing what to do in this space. But the second part that you mentioned that's really, really important of knowing that you're referring to other doctors that are also going to write their notes in a way that is okay to be scrutinized. When doctors are seeing a lot of patients, they are doing a lot of stuff to try to save time. And that's not a bad thing, because it's great to save time as a provider, but you also have to say, did I make sure that I documented everything that's needed to be? If somebody looks at this, are they going to know my thought process? Are they going to know why I recommended that? Are they going to know why the patient needed it? And I think that's a really important thing for providers to understand if they want to get into the space of, you need to be educated, you need to work with teams of people that are also educated in this space, because ultimately, that's what you can do that's best for your patient, is making sure that they can get their care paid for that they need. I
also want to throw out there that, especially to the doctors that are afraid or thinking about getting their feet wet in the personal injury world, it will make you a better physician if you do personal injury. It's okay to get scrutinized. It's good to have your deposition taken and see how they're going to come at you at all the different angles, because after that deposition, if you found that you did something wrong, you're not going to repeat that mistake. You're going to fix it.
You'll learn from it.
And that's a beautiful thing. And what's great about the conferences is you're going to be learning from people who have already been through it, who have made the mistakes, who have been called out on those mistakes. So I think it's going to elevate your game if you're going to be a physician, because I consider the doctors who do personal injury work to be kind of the creme de la creme, because one, they stand by their work, they know how to write a report, and they're willing to stand up in front of a jury and say, no, this is how it is, this is why it is, and be able to articulate it, explain it, and justify everything that's being done. So to deliver a message to the physicians who are thinking about getting into it, these are the types of cases that end up in litigation. Not reviewing prior medical records, but making causation statements that don't match, okay? Bills that are off the charts, absolutely unreasonable. And 3, poor documentation. Any one of those will likely land a case into litigation and put us, the attorneys, in a really bad place, because we have to figure out, okay, now is there a way to make this right? Is there a way to explain it out?
How do you still help the patient in that circumstance?
We've had nightmare scenarios with some companies where they hand you these billing statements that you could buy a house for what they're trying to charge for a few injections, and that's not right. And the insurance companies agree that's not right. Believe me, they don't want to pay. So it's important to always be reasonable. Be reasonable, be fair, which your company always is. Good documentation, and know the language. Okay. But I personally think the more PI you do as a doctor, the better doctor you become, because, like we said earlier, you're asking other questions. You're investigating psychological injuries, neurological injuries. Even though, you might, if you're a chiropractor, you're asking questions about a TBI because you might have to refer that patient out to a specialist. It increases the awareness of the bigger picture. So I encourage doctors to get into the personal injury world, but definitely educate yourself first. Learn the language, learn the landmines, so you don't step on them.
I think that's really great advice for anybody that's looking into that. I do agree that it will make you a better provider. When you are forced to think laterally, when your work can be scrutinized, that should make you better. And I think that that shouldn't be something that people should shy away from. That should be something that they really lean into
Right.
and work towards being the best provider that they possibly can be. So I love that, and I think that's really good advice. So let's go back to the patient for one moment. So we talked about if you're in an accident, I'm going to summarize the advice that you've given so far. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I'm going to summarize the advice you've given. So if you're in a car accident, first thing is obviously cooperate with the police, do everything you're supposed to. If you go to the emergency room, listen to your doctors, right?
Yeah.
Second, best things you can do is you need to go and see a doctor that specializes in treating people that are post-accident, right? Two, get an attorney so that as you're trying to navigate the stressful situation that it is, you can have your questions answered, you can really have an advocate on your side that's going to help you along the way.
Yes.
Next, as you're getting prescribed care, do your best that you're able to, life permitting, to follow what the doctor recommends. Because if you want to get better, the best thing you can do is follow your doctor's orders, right? So
Yes.
go through that process, communicating with all of your doctors. That, like if you've got new things going on, tell your doctor.
Yes.
If you have new conditions, if you have something that you think may be connected there, tell your doctors. And if you have multiple doctors, tell all of them the same thing. So if you've gone through all of that, and you've really tried to do all of those things, this is what sets you up as a patient, in your opinion, to have the best outcome where you're going to come out of this traumatic experience in the best possible condition because you've done everything that the doctors talked about,
Right.
You've had somebody that advocates for you and works with you along the way, and ideally all of your bills are going to be paid for and you're going to be able to come out of this a whole person again, going back to work and doing the things that you want to do. Is that accurate?
Yes, very. And I beg your patients who following an accident, please do not give a recorded statement until you speak to an attorney first. I can't even tell you things that people have said during these recorded statements. That
When would somebody give a recorded statement?
right after the accident.
To
So, an insurance adjuster right out of the gate, because that's
So you're not talking about like a police report, you're talking about insurance adjuster.
correct. So what I've seen happen is during these phone calls, they'll try to downplay the injuries and get the patient to try to downplay the
So
situation.
give an example of this. So I got in a car accident, all of a sudden my insurance is going to call and they're going to be like, hey, we want to help you out. How does that phone call go?
Sure. So, tell us what's bothering you. Neck pain, neck injury. Okay. Well, sounds like you're just going to need some chiropractic care. So why don't we pay for eight weeks of chiropractic care? We'll give you about $3,000 in your pocket, and we'll call it a day. And then this will be resolved. You can put this behind you.
And if I'm as a patient, I'm like, I don't know. Like, what do they say from there?
They don't accept any offers right out of the gate because you don't know what your case is worth, you don't know what your injuries are yet, and you're not going to outsmart the insurance companies. Like this is all scripted. This is all by design. They're not trying to help
So how
you.
do they convince somebody to sign that?
Just like that?
Because they just say, hey, here's some money, we're going to take care of you, let's get this paid right off the bat so you don't have to worry about it.
Yes.
Is that what they're saying?
That's exactly it. And they do it with charm. Like, oh, we really want to help you. We want to.
Okay.
But the
And
problem is they're
patient-
not explaining.
Patients are like, okay, well, that's great. I don't have to worry about
Exactly.
going through a lawsuit. I don't have to worry about anything. I can negotiate this settlement. And they say, it'll give you 3. And I say, I want 6. And then they're like, okay, we'll give you 6. You're right, you need that. It's like, oh, I did a good job negotiating this.
Oh, it broke my heart when that old lady called me and said, I settled my case for $6,000 and she had a $33,000 hospital bill with a brain injury.
Wow.
Broke my heart because once they locked it in over the phone, that was it. And
So those recorded statements, if they agree to an amount,
that's it, game over.
it's done.
Yeah, the case is settled.
So like one of the best advices that you can give is if you're in an auto accident, you have an injury, and you're talking to your insurance company, get some advice before agreeing to any type of settlement at all.
Yeah, I honestly call the attorney before you give any type of recorded statement because the attorney is obligated to tell you what your rights are, to explain the process to you.
So once they have an attorney, can the insurance company continue to call the patient?
Well, what we do is we direct them to call us directly,
Got
and then we quarterback the communication. So we're involved in it. So what do you need to talk to our client about? Okay, we'll get them on the phone. They want to ask you these questions. We cooperate, but in a controlled environment versus just letting clients talk. Or
How common is it for patients to settle way below what they actually need to cover their healthcare bills?
From what I'm hearing, very common. And
Wow.
right now what's happening, a lot of insurance companies are sending offer letters right after the accident. So, and not just one company, we're talking several. So I signed a case, the accident was 2 weeks ago, I got a settlement offer letter in the mail.
Is that going to you or to the patient or both?
Well, it's
or?
going to the patient. Then when I get involved, I get a copy of the letter. And I call the adjuster. What is this? Oh, we're making a settlement offer. It's like, my client just started treating. We don't even know what the case is worth. No, you can take that back. Thank you. But a lot of people are just taking the money and calling it quits. And it's saving the insurance companies thousands upon thousands of dollars and screwing over the patients because they don't know any better. Talk to an attorney before you give a recorded statement. Talk to an attorney before you agree to any personal injury settlement and when you're not represented. It's so risky to do those things because, like I said, you could have a traumatic brain injury, not know it yet, and have a $6,000 settlement because you didn't call anybody first and get advice.
So let's talk about this. So if I'm in a car accident, I'm going to be dealing with, I need to have repairs for my car and possibly repairs for my body. Are those going to be done in the same conversation? Are those different conversations? Are those negotiated together of like, I need a new car, like my car's totaled, versus I also need, as you said, chiropractic and interventional pain. What's the difference in those two conversations? How does that work?
That's an excellent question. So property damage, bodily injury, they're two different claims. Right? So you're going to be dealing with two different adjusters having two very different conversations. Very rarely does one adjuster handle both.
Okay.
All right. So the property damage claim, what happens during those phone calls is you're trying to get a client
you don't
into
need an
a
attorney
rental.
for that one, just negotiate for your car and stuff like that.
Well, the problem is they could do the recorded statements.
Okay.
And ask all the questions that
So they could ask about your injury when they're asking about the car.
Oh, they'll pounce. If your client, if the patient's not represented, like they have protocols to follow, the insurance adjusters. And all these protocols are designed to get as much information in the beginning as possible, but also try to save the company money and pay out as little as possible.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I don't think that system is right, especially because liability adjusters don't have an obligation to deal with people in good faith or fairly. So they can just say, I think your case is worth $10,000 based on what you just told me. We're going to issue a check, and sometimes they won't even get a settlement release. They'll just issue a check, and if that check gets cashed, you have a settlement. It's done. So, but they don't have to explain the cause and effect. So their goal oftentimes is just get them to agree to a settlement number.
They're talking about property damage. They're going through that. You do need to be careful what you say on that call, it sounds like, because it can be used. But as far as that one, that's not as relevant to the conversation we've had today as than the health and well-being, right?
Correct.
Because that's a different policy. It's a different, usually, adjuster, you're saying. And that's the one where it's like, don't give a recorded statement in any form on your health.
Well, I'm giving a blanket
Of
recommendation.
course, I get that.
Don't
There's
give
not legal advice on here. Yes,
Yeah,
I get
exactly.
that.
So I personally would not agree to recorded statements until I'm involved in the case, because I want to know, all right, what's being asked, what information can I have ready for the adjuster. I just don't want my clients caught off guard and speculate, because people aren't used to dealing with attorneys or adjusters or speaking in medical jargon, legal jargon, etc. So it's important to be prepared going into any conversation with the other side. And it's not that you're hiding any information or anything like that. You want to be prepared to answer the question and answer the questions accurately. Absolutely. And that's where an attorney comes in. So we'll say things, for example, like, don't speculate. If somebody asks you the question of how fast were you going, don't say, I think I was going 70. No, I don't know. If you don't know how fast you were going, the answer is, I don't know. Yeah. But the speculation will now be used against you because you gave an answer.
So in what way will that be used against you?
Well, for example, if they're trying to do an accident reconstruction and litigation, so they'll take that statement, hand it to the accident reconstructionist, and they'll reconstruct the accident based on the speed provided by the client, which might not be accurate because it's pure speculation. So stuff like that, or they'll try to say, well, your client was going too fast for conditions based on them saying they were going 70 and a 65. So therefore, they're partially at fault for the accident. We're not going to pay full value on the case. But if the patient doesn't know how fast they were going, the answer should be, I don't know. Yeah. And those are conversations that attorneys have with their clients. So that's part of the deposition prep when we go to litigation. If you don't know the answer to a direct question, your answer is, I don't know. Yep. Don't guess. Yep. And people guess because they feel that they have to give a response. Whether it's the right response or not, they just feel like they have to provide one.
So
and that
it sounds like that could happen on the conversation with the adjuster for the property, though.
Absolutely.
Okay, your car's totaled. How fast were you going? That type of stuff, and they don't realize that the information they're giving on their car could also be used against them
Right.
if they actually go to litigation on their healthcare condition.
Right, and that's where
Wow.
an attorney comes in, is we give the big perspective. We explain how everything ties together, what information is being provided for what purpose, and we try to help as much as we can. That's why we prefer to be the mouthpiece for the patients. Let all communications go through our office. You don't have to worry about, asking for a rental. We'll make the phone call. You don't have to worry about the medical payment checks coming in. We'll follow up with the adjuster and handle all of that. You just focus on getting better and going to your doctor's appointments.
Okay. So are there reasons not to use an attorney if you've been in a car accident?
Well, I think the question there is, are there circumstances where an attorney either wouldn't be helpful or you don't have a case that an attorney would sign off on? So
Yeah.
I've had cases where a client goes to the chiropractor for 2 visits,
Yeah.
and that's it. Small accident. I'm not going to say you need an attorney for every single case. That's a situation where we're not going to make that big of an impact arguing over 2 dates of service.
Yeah.
So it's situational. It really is situational. So there are cases that I decline because I'll say, listen, I don't want to take your money. This is what your case is worth. Here are the arguments you should make, and sometimes I've even given them outlines of a demand letter and say, this is what you fill in and send it off, because I don't want to, if a case is worth $3,000, I don't want to take a percentage of that small
Yep.
case.
It's not worth the time.
No,
they can do that themselves.
But I'd rather have the goodwill with the patient to know, if they ever get involved in a major accident or something down the road, I was the attorney that was there for them, answered their questions, and took care of them, was selfless, like your office tends to be from a medical perspective. So other times attorneys won't take a case because there's no insurance or inadequate damages or liability is adverse to your patient. So there are a number of variables that we look at before we decide to take on a case. And I've turned down cases where I'll say, I don't think I can help you here. I think you'd be better off just handling this yourself. I've done that.
Okay, so next question, it's related, but next question. What are the best things to look for in an attorney group? So there's good groups out there and there's less than good groups out there. Everybody knows that. Same with doctors, right? What are the characteristics of the good attorney groups that people should be looking for?
Okay, so now that depends on where are they looking. So if you're looking at billboards and commercials and that's the extent of your investigation, you're going to be very limited to larger, more mill-esque, assembly line operations, where attorneys have hundreds and hundreds of cases that they're handling individually. So they should listen to their doctors, who their doctors have had experiences with, what those experiences were, reading reviews online. Okay, just because you heard a jingle or you saw a billboard doesn't mean that they're good, doesn't mean that they're bad, but it doesn't mean that they're good. You want to find an attorney who gets the job done. Results matter, not the size of the practice or the number of billboards or commercials that somebody has. And that's one thing I've always taken pride in my office is we go for results. Everything is driven for the benefit of the individual client. Okay, I'm not trying to have the biggest law firm out there, but I do want to have the best one. And so we're committed to quality. Try to find attorneys that have that philosophy.
Okay, so if I get this right, the characteristics of the best law firms to work with if you've been in an accident are: 1, talk to your doctor and see who they like to work with.
Yes.
That's going to be a really good statement of validation, right?
Yes.
Secondly, look at the reviews of people that have used the law firm and see if it fits the type of thing that you're looking for.
Yeah.
So the 2 best ways to find good law firms are talk to your friends, talk to your family, read online reviews, see what people say about them, and then talk to your doctors and say, hey, who do you work with and who's been a good attorney to work with that actually cares about you getting the right type of care?
That's absolutely right. That's very, very good advice, very sound. And again, choosing your attorney is a very, very important decision. And you have to find the attorney who's going to take care of you, the individual, okay? And that's, like I said, something that we pride ourselves at the Lazzara Law Firm. We want to make sure that clients feel like people and that they're people we see, we care about, we're going to take care of.
Awesome. Well, I know this is Doctors Unscripted, but as my general counsel always says, he's a doctor too, right? Yeah. You got your Juris Doctorate. So we have loved having you on the show today to be able to just talk about, again, helping to unveil this. This is sometimes a mystery box of nobody thinks about car accidents until they're in one. And then once they do, they're like, crap, what do I do now? Yeah. And hopefully this has been really helpful for people as they've looked to say, how do I take off this mystery box, pull back the veil and say, what do I do? Where do I start? What are the best steps to go from? And then how do I find good attorney groups that can represent me and ultimately help me through this complicated journey to get better and to get my health back? So thank you so much for coming on. I think the things that you've shared were fantastic and can be a huge help for our patients and for our listeners. So really appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I think this is a great service that you're doing for your patients and the doctors out there. So congratulations on the success of this podcast.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Absolutely.